This is Israel.
You are tuned to the External Service of Israel Radio, broadcasting from Jerusalem. The time is 22:30 GMT, 12:30 a.m. Israel time. Shalom Aleichem, good evening, and welcome to our broadcast for listeners in Europe and North America. Our broadcast frequencies this evening, 11655, 9815, 9435, and 7412 kilohertz. In the news tonight, former Premier Golda Meir is buried on Mount Herzl in Jerusalem. Hundreds of foreign dignitaries, including the U.S. delegation headed by Lillian Carter, attend the funeral. U.S. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance holds a third meeting with President Sadat in Cairo, after which he says new ideas have been worked out to break the deadlock in the peace negotiations. Vance is expected to outline the new formula to Prime Minister Begin when he returns to Israel tomorrow. Overcast skies and driving rain provided the backcloth for the funeral in Jerusalem today of former Premier Golda Meir, who died on Friday at the age of 80. After thousands had paid their last respects to Golda during the lying in state at the Knesset, it was the turn of foreign dignitaries to pay their tribute. The funeral service began at the Knesset before moving on to Mount Herzl, where Golda Meir's body was finally laid to rest. Outside the Parliament building this morning was our reporter, Tzvi Pantanovitz.
It was a simple, modest service, without eulogies, as Golda Meir had wanted. Because of the rain and cold outside, the service was moved to the foyer of the Knesset, and there, under the delicate Chagall tapestries, looking down, it seemed to me, benignly on the distinguished gathering, the funeral service took place. At the entrance to the foyer, the coffin draped in the blue and white state flag on its black bier, two candles sentinel at the base, and all the time until the service began, army chaplains reciting prayers from the Psalms, a Knesset guard of honor alternating with 4 IDF soldiers. Facing the bier, in the front row, members of Golda's immediate family, the President of the State, Yitzhak Navon, Prime Minister Begin, Cabinet Ministers, the Chief Rabbis, friends and comrades who were with her through the difficult times, the good times in more than half a century of endeavor on behalf of the Jewish people and the State of Israel. The distinguished guests from abroad, Miss Lillian, Secretary of State Vance, Dr. Kissinger, Sir Harold Wilson, and many others from countries around the world. The ceremony itself, stark and simple. Kaddish, the memorial prayer from Menachem the son, in a voice breaking with emotion. A prayer for the soul of the departed from the Chief Army Chaplain Gad Navon. Readings from Golda's own writings by the actress Orna Porat, in which Golda's longing and hope for a permanent, genuine peace for Israel came out so strongly. Perhaps to give some feeling of the atmosphere, I go back to the final moments of the service in the foyer of the Knesset, Israel's parliament.
Ceremony of tearing the clothes of immediate members of the family is now taking place. It is a sign of mourning. Here, a symbolic tear is made in the lapel of the jacket or the dress. And now, the coffin must be removed very carefully onto the shoulders of the pallbearers. The 6th Lieutenant's Colonel of the Israel Defense Forces. From here, the cortege will move to Mount Herzl, Golda Meir's final place of rest. So here from the Knesset, which saw some of the fine stars, as a member of the Knesset and as Prime Minister, Golda Meir battled with parliamentary adversaries, where she gave inspiration to so many, where she joked with Sadat, but told him so simply and forcefully that peace could only come when there would be an Arab leader who would say that he was ready for peace. For the last 15 years, unbeknown to us, she fought her own personal battle with illness. Golda Meir's body is being taken to Mount Herzl for her burial. The distinguished gathering here is now moving behind the coffin towards Mount Herzl.
Outside in the Knesset forecourt, in the now driving rain, I walked in step with a grey-haired woman who told me how she felt as we moved towards the gates.
It's very difficult to put into words what one feels when the person who's been so much a part of your entire life and the entire life of the Jewish people is no more. I felt that it was a very, very dignified service, and just as she would have wanted it to be. And the words which were spoken, which were her words, are as true today as when they were uttered.
Taking up the progress of the state funeral, reporter David Apple was at Mount Herzl as the cortege arrived.
It is after 11 o'clock here at a wintry morning in Jerusalem on Mount Herzl with torrential rain. And a sea of black umbrellas surrounds the open grave of Golda Meir as her body is brought here for the ceremony at the Knesset. And the captain from the armed forces recites some psalms. Golda Meir is to be buried in a fresh grave hewn out of the harsh Jerusalem stone, into which symbolically a few fresh green leaves have fallen. Mrs. Meir's son Menachem recites Kaddish, the prayer for the dead. And now, as the crowd of honor stands to attention, the body of Israel's former Prime Minister, Golda Meir, is gently lowered into her grave here on Mount Herzl. Who has covered the momentous events of Golda's life can really only pause and reflect. In some ways, paradoxically, it is an intensely private moment for the public journalist. A moment when one recalls the interviews one has had with Golda Meir as Prime Minister. She became Prime Minister in 1969 and looked so determined, yet so apprehensive of what was about her. But when I spoke to her, she returned to Jerusalem with that famous shopping bag after a trip to Richard Nixon in the United States. One recognized then the warmth of that wonderful personality as she spoke of the incredible hospitable reception she had received from the new American administration and her own Jews. Surprised, proud, dignified, warm, and yet so friendly. That's how I remember her. Golda Meir. And we are now burying beside the graves of Mount Herzl of the other giants of Israel, beside her predecessor, Levi Eshkol, beside Zalman Shazar, beside Theodore Herzl, and also beside the graves of the soldiers who died in the wars of Israel, and for whom she wept, as Israel weeps for her now.
God full of mercy, chanted by the chief cantor of the Israel Defense Forces at the funeral in Jerusalem this morning of Golda Meir.
Alternating with 4 IDF soldiers. Facing the bier, in the front row, members of Golda's immediate family. The President of the State, Yitzhak Navon, Prime Minister Begin, Cabinet Ministers, the Chief Rabbis, friends and comrades who were with her through the difficult times, the good times in more than half a century of endeavor on behalf of the Jewish people and the State of Israel. The distinguished guests from abroad, Miss Lillian, Secretary of State Vance, Dr. Kissinger, Sir Harold Wilson, and many others from countries around the world. The ceremony itself, stark and simple. Kaddish, the memorial prayer from Menachem the son, in a voice breaking with emotion. The prayer for the soul of the departed from the Chief Army Chaplain Gad Navon. Readings from Golda's own writings by the actress Orna Porat, in which Golda's longing and hope for a permanent, genuine peace for Israel came out so strongly. Perhaps to give some feeling of the atmosphere, I go back to the final moments of the service in the foyer of the Knesset, Israel's parliament. Golda Meir's final place of rest. So here from the Knesset, which saw some of the finest hours, as a member of the Knesset and as Prime Minister, where Golda Meir battled with parliamentary adversaries, where she gave inspiration to so many, where she joked with Sadat, but told him so simply and forcefully that peace could only come when it would be an Arab leader who would say that he was ready for peace. Where for the last 15 years, unbeknown to us, she fought her own personal battle with illness. Golda Meir's body is being taken to Mount Hudson for her burial. The distinguished gathering here is now moving
behind the coffin on towards Mount Herzl.
Outside in the Knesset forecourt, in the now driving rain, I walked in step with a grey-haired woman who told me how she felt as we moved towards the gate.
It's very difficult to put into words what one feels when the person who's been so much a part of your entire life and the entire life of the Jewish people is no more. I felt that it was a very, very dignified service, and just as she would have wanted it to be. And the words which were spoken, which were her words, are as true today as when they were uttered.
Taking up the progress of the state funeral, reporter David Ethel was at Mount Herzl as the cortege arrived.
It is after 11 o'clock here on a wintry morning in Jerusalem on Mount Herzl with torrential rain, and a sea of black umbrellas surrounds the open grave of Golda Meir as her body is brought here for the ceremony at the Knesset. And the chaplain from the Armed Forces recites some psalms. Golda Meir is to be buried in a fresh grave hewn out of the harsh Jerusalem stone, into which symbolically a few fresh green leaves have fallen. Mrs. Meir's son Menachem recites Kaddish, the prayer for the dead. And now, as a sort of honor turns to attention, the body of Israel's former Prime Minister, Golda Meir, is gently lowered into her grave here on Mount Herzl. This. Only the poet who has covered the momentous events of Golda's life can really only pause and reflect. In some ways, paradoxically, it is an intensely private moment for the public journalist. A moment when one recalls the interviews one has had with Golda Meir as Prime Minister. And she became Prime Minister in 1969. And looked so determined, yet so apprehensive over what's in her head. And when I spoke to her, she returned to Jerusalem with that famous shopping bag after a trip to Richard Nixon in the United States. One recognized then the warmth of that wonderful personality. And she spoke of the incredible hospitable reception she had received from the new American administration and her own Jews. Surprised, proud, dignified, warm, and yet so friendly. That's how I remember her. Golda Meir. And we are now burying beside the grave of Mount Herzl of the other giants of Israel. Beside her predecessor, Levi Eshkol. Beside Zalman Shazar. Beside Theodor Herzl. And also beside the graves of the soldiers who died in the wars of Israel, and for whom she wept, as Israel weeps for her now.
in the Adonai unacharatam vitanua v'shalom al nishava v'tamot l'gala l'kayim hayamim v'nomar
Prayer, Merciful God, sung by the Chief Chaplain of the Israel Defense Forces at Golda Meir's funeral this morning. Although Golda Meir did not live to see a peace agreement with Egypt, she died at a time of escalating political activity, as the December 17th target date for a treaty signing set down at Camp David was fast approaching. U.S. Secretary of State Vance, who attended the funeral this morning, later flew back to Cairo, where he's already had 2 rounds of talks with President Sadat earlier in the week. Vance was scheduled to meet the Egyptian leader for a 3rd time tonight. Members of the U.S. Secretary's party say Vance will be putting forward a proposal involving mutual concessions to break the deadlock. There are reports that the United States is proposing the drafting of letters to solve the dispute over Article 6 in the treaty, which concerns the priority of an Israel-Egypt agreement over other alliances Egypt may have with the Arab states. The Americans are also said to be recommending that the question of linkage be solved by means of letters attached to the treaty. With Vance only due back in Israel to begin substantial discussions tomorrow, the question uppermost in everyone's mind is whether, in fact, a treaty will be signed by Sunday. Earlier this evening, President Carter was asked in Washington whether he thought it was a case of now or never.
I don't think it's now or never, and you very accurately described this deadline date as one established by Israel and Egypt in the most solemn commitment at Camp David. Secretary Vance reports to me from Cairo good progress having been made between him and President Sadat. He has not begun further negotiations with the Israelis yet because of Mrs. Meir's funeral. He will return to Egypt and try to conclude his discussions with President Sadat and then go back to Israel for discussions with the Israelis. I consider the deadline date to be quite important. If the Egyptians and Israelis cannot keep a commitment on a 3-month conclusion of a peace treaty when they themselves are the only 2 nations involved, then I think it would be very difficult for them to expect the terms of the treaty they are negotiating to be carried out with assurance. It sets a very bad precedent for Israel and Egypt not to reach a conclusion. I think the differences that presently divide Israel and Egypt are minor, certainly compared to the resolution of major differences in the past. And I believe that President Sadat has reconfirmed his intention, his commitment to Secretary Vance to conclude the negotiations without further delay. My hope is, and my expectation is, that the Israelis will have the same attitude.
You said last week that if Prime Minister Begin and President Sadat had been able to negotiate together on some of these questions over the past few weeks, that there would not have been some of the problems that have arisen. My question is, if all else fails, would you consider calling the 2 leaders back to Camp David or some other place to negotiate directly with you to resolve this matter?
Well, let me say that I don't have the present plans to do that. If all else failed, and I felt that we could get together again, I would not hesitate to do so. But I don't envision that being, I don't envision that taking place.
U.S. President Carter speaking at today's news conference. Also involved in the latest diplomatic activity in Jerusalem today was former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in the capital for Mrs. Meir's funeral. Just before a meeting with Foreign Minister Dayan this afternoon, Kissinger expressed optimism that a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel will be signed. Kissinger would not say whether he thought that this could be done by December 17th deadline, referred to in the Camp David Accords, but said Kissinger the date was not sacrosanct. After his meeting with Dayan, Dr. Kissinger was asked by reporter David Essing about his role in the present negotiations and whether he was getting back into the act.
He's an old friend and we trust. Father.
discuss the present situation?
Yeah, just in a general way.
Have you made any suggestions, Dr. Kissinger, at this point?
I'm not involved in the negotiations. We have a very able Secretary of State and he'll handle it.
Dr. Henry Kissinger. Another member of the American delegation attending Golda Meir's funeral today was U.S. Senator Jacob Javits. Later in the day, reporter Alan Ben-Ami raised the latest political developments with the senator and asked him if he saw any change in the state of the peace negotiations since his last visit to the Middle East several weeks ago.
Well, when we were here 2 weeks ago, the parties still felt that they had little time to turn around, and disagreements had developed on second thought, largely as far as Egypt was concerned. In addition, when we were here before, the Israeli cabinet had not affirmed the fact that it would accept the U.S. compromise draft as it did subsequently, which I think was a very wise decision. I rather deprecated and was unhappy about the implication that it was that or nothing. But that has since been dispelled by both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. I think that's been very helpful. Now I believe the parties realize that they cannot carry this on very much longer. I think it's a matter of a few weeks when the opportunity will possibly be lost. And it has been properly called the moment of truth. And I believe now that as these 4 remaining points, in my judgment, are bridgeable, that they can and will get together within the time limited. While I do not believe that time is necessarily December 17th, the expiration of the 3-month period for negotiation, I believe it is very close to that, and that they must now decide and will.
What do you see as the possible way of resolving the differing attitudes on the points at issue?
Well, as far as the paramountcy of the treaty between Israel and Egypt, the first place, international law makes the last treaty the one that has the paramount standing. Secondly, I see no inconsistency between honorable security treaties between Sadat and other Arab states and his agreement with Israel, because the agreement with Israel provides against untoward aggression by Israel, which is unthinkable, but nonetheless it does provide that. So no Arab state which isn't going to dream up some attack on it would have any reason to complain. As far as the timetable for autonomy or self-rule, I think that depends very heavily upon whether the conditions of self-rule, including Arab leaders who are ready to take on the job, and an agreement upon the modalities between Egypt and Israel, is available. And therefore you can't have a fixed timetable which will bring great breaches in security, force Israel out of a situation so dangerous to its security, unless the conditions under which that timetable is fixed have been met.
Senator Javits. The many foreign dignitaries in Israel to pay their tribute to the memory of Golda Meir were tonight hosted at a reception given by Israel's President Yitzhak Navon. Among the guests was Lillian Carter, mother of the U.S. President, Henry Kissinger, and a very close friend of Israel, former British Premier Harold Wilson. In this interview, Sir Harold is being asked by reporter David Essing how he sees the prospects for a Middle East peace.
I was also about in America lecturing at the time of Camp David, and I was up there, and I said I thought it was a matter for great congratulations of both the heads of government from the Middle East and indeed for President Carter. Obviously, one wants to see the last details completed. Then it should be very confident indeed.
What do you think should be done to break the current impasse in the negotiations?
The most important thing is that anyone who is not in the negotiations should keep his mouth shut.
But as an observer of Middle East developments?
As an observer, I think it's best to leave the people on the spot to take the decision.
Now, one additional question.
Middle East has had too much advice in the past.
One additional question, though, Sir Harold.
Do you think peace between Egypt and Israel would be a significant step toward overall peace? I think yes. I think it would certainly be a significant step for a wider peace in the whole Middle East. I think it would make clear to the Russians what they must be slowly learning, that they have nothing to gain from their successive interventions in the Middle East. That of itself will be an advantage.
In the wake of the Baghdad summit meeting, there seems to be a toughening of the rejectionist state position with Soviet support. Do you see the Soviet Union trying to sabotage the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt?
Well, I'm not so much in touch with these questions as I was a couple of years ago when I had a private talk with Brezhnev on the subject. I do know Brezhnev once said to Arafat, no good talking to me. If you want to talk to anybody else in close touch with Israel, go and see Harold Wilson. Arafat didn't come. So Saddam Army was, whom I knew was murdered last year, I used to come regularly. No, I don't think that the Soviet Union are going to have much say in the matter at all.
You think that's a good thing?
Yes.
Another great friend of Israel in Jerusalem today was U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. The former American ambassador to the United Nations expressed his views on the current Middle East negotiations in this interview with David Essing.
Senator Moynihan, Secretary of State Cyrus Vance has now embarked on what is being considered a crucial stage of negotiations. Do you see a way out of the present impasse?
Well, surely we hope there is one. It's not for me to say what is the nature of that impasse, but I've been speaking to our ambassador, speaking to Israelis, to government officials. You are so close, after 30 years of war, to get this close. Surely we must all hope that the last steps can be taken.
There is speculation that Secretary Vance may be coming with some kind of trade-off. In other words, that if Israel gives in on the timetable issue, that perhaps the Egyptians can be persuaded to agree to Israel's demand on Article 6 that the treaty have priority over Egypt's other commitments to the Arab world. Do you think that this is a possibility, or this is a good game plan?
May I simply say that we are at a point in negotiations when such reasonable thoughts are available to the negotiators. We're not in that early situation where the parties in the Middle East, all but Israel itself, denied the right of Israel to exist. Well, now, when you're talking about timetables, you're talking about trade-offs, you're talking about linkages, these come under the range of negotiable things. These are things about which reasonable men of goodwill and women of goodwill can reach agreement, and which can be monitored, and which can be reinforced. Not to anyone's entire satisfaction, but to a sufficient satisfaction. And we're hopeful. I mean, there is no reason you shouldn't succeed.
Senator Church, the new chairman of the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee, has warned that because of the financial situation in the United States, that foreign aid may have to be cut. Do you think that there's any danger to America's foreign aid, financial aid to Israel at this point, in its being cut or not reaching expectations that Jerusalem would like to see?
Well, certainly our mood back home is one where the domestic programs are being cut, therefore. So the subject of charity begins at home, why people would ask why help as much as we have been doing in the nations abroad. But I would speak, well, I can only speak for myself. The support for the aftermath of the peace treaty in the Middle East between Egypt and the Middle East and Israel would come as absolute first priority to me, and would have my total support, and I cannot imagine I'm alone in that. I mean, it's so important to the world, it's so important to America.
And finally, Senator, what do you envisage happening in the next few days, the next few weeks in the peace negotiations?
Oh, I could only hope that we will see a treaty signed, but that would come under the heading of advice to two countries, Egypt and Israel, of which I'm not a citizen, and to my government, of which I'm not a member. I'm a member of the Senate. But we just care so much about this wonderful country, Israel, and we think peace is what you've always sought, not on any conditions. Peace is what you really wanted, what you came here for, and we wish it for you. Shalom.
Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. The afternoon session of the Knesset began today with a minute's silence for Golda Meir. Knesset Speaker Yitzhak Shamir announced that the House would hold a special session devoted to her memory next Monday. This afternoon, the Knesset was also expected to debate the question of human rights in Israel. However, the coalition defeated a proposal to hold the debate by 22 votes to 19. In calling for the debate, Knesset member Shulamit Aloni of the Citizens' Rights Movement said Israel had not signed international human rights declarations because clauses such as those prohibiting discrimination on grounds of sex or religion were being violated in this country. Minister without portfolio Moshe Nissim told the House that in fact the government had this week approved a manifesto against racism. In many areas, he added, Israel could pride itself on considerable greater liberalism than that granted by the Human Rights Declaration of the United Nations. The Israel Air Force is carrying out tests on its Hercules transport aircraft after the American Air Force decided to ground its Hercules fleet. The Israel Army spokesman said a decision about grounding the planes will be made only after the tests. The American move came after the crash of the Hercules and the detection of a fault in the engines of several older versions. Jordan's King Hussein today held a final round of talks with French government leaders. He met with Foreign Minister Jean-François Poncet before holding talks with President Giscard d'Estaing. Diplomats in Paris said that Giscard was certain to respond favorably to Hussein's request that France use its influence to have Jordan's position in the Middle East negotiations endorsed by the common market. Meeting in Damascus today, the representatives of the European Economic Community issued a communique stating that the Palestinian issue is the crux of the Middle East problem. The statement came at the end of a three-day session of the Euro-Arab dialogue. 166 passengers from Tehran arrived in Israel this afternoon. They were the first people to leave the country for 2 days, and among the arrivals were Israelis and Iranian Jews. The three Israelis who last night seized the West German Cultural Center in Tel Aviv later surrendered to the police. Wearing gas masks and armed only with starter pistols, the attackers were led by Andrei Kolchinsky, who lost most of his family in the Holocaust. He is currently on a 2-year suspended sentence for past actions against Germans and German institutions in Israel. He now faces trial tomorrow on charges of trespassing, the use of firearms, and holding hostages. A bomb went off today at the edge of the Shiloh settlement. No one was injured and no damage was caused. Recently, a bomb exploded at a supermarket in Kiryat Arba. A reporter says that these were the first 2 terrorist incidents in Israeli settlements in the territories. One of the founders of the extremist Nazarei Karta movement, Rabbi Shlomo Katzenelbogen, has died in Jerusalem and will be buried in about 2 hours' time. The rabbi was born in Jerusalem and never left the city. He was 85 years old. The Nazarei Karta movement, which is Aramaic for guardians of the city, has always opposed the Jewish state in Israel. The rabbi will be buried on Har HaMenuchot, not on the Mount of Olives as is traditional, because his movement considers it territory captured by the Zionists. His funeral tonight is likely to be attended by thousands of members of the Mea Shearim ultra-religious community. Rebbe laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer has been invited to a conference called 1,000 Years of Polish Jewry, which will take place in Tel Aviv in February. Over 300 delegates from 14 countries are expected to take part. You're tuned to Israel broadcasting from Jerusalem. Now a second look at the major points in tonight's news. Former Prime Minister Golda Meir was buried on Mount Herzl in Jerusalem. Hundreds of foreign dignitaries and Israeli public figures attended the funeral. U.S. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance is expected to hold a third meeting with President Sadat tonight. He will return to Israel tomorrow. That concludes our program for Europe and Africa. We shall be on the air again in 2 hours' time with a half-hour broadcast for North America at 11655, 9815, 9435, and 7412 kilohertz. Other English transmissions tomorrow at 5 and 12 hours GMT, and at 20 hours GMT this 30-minute program on 11655, 9815 kilohertz, to Africa on 17685, 9425, and 9009 kilohertz. If you'd like to write to us, send us letters, comments, reception reports, you can send them to Israel Radio, the External Service in Jerusalem. The address once again, Israel Radio, External Service, Jerusalem. The news and program in French follow in approximately 30 seconds. This is your announcer, Michael Shafir, saying thanks for listening, wishing you Lala Tov, good night, and Shalom from Jerusalem.
Israel Magazine.
Jérusalem, radiodiffusion israélienne. Erev Tov, bonsoir, avec vous pour notre première demi-heure de la soirée. Tout de suite les dernières nouvelles au micro Francine Kaufmann.